Welcome to the Book of Life, a show about Jewish people and the books we read. I'm Heidi Estrin. The Book of Life is a podcast service of the Feldman Library at Congregation B'nai Israel in Boca Raton, Florida. Additional support comes from the Association of Jewish Libraries. In this February 2008 episode of our podcast, we get experimental. On February 7th, we used the TalkShoe service to host our first ever live call-in show. This recording of the call-in show has been edited for clarity and sound quality, but other than that, you are hearing the same show as those who listened live on February 7th. Many of those who called in are active within the field of children's literature as authors or bloggers, and links to their accomplishments are provided in the show notes for this episode at bookoflifepodcast.com. Enjoy! Welcome to the Book of Life podcast's first ever live call-in show. I'm your host, Heidi Estrin. We'll be joined shortly by special guest Pamela Ehrenberg, the author of Ethan Suspended. First, I just wanted to let you know that this is not a toll-free number, but if you want to participate in today's discussion, dial 724-444-7444, enter the call ID 10816, and then if you have a TalkShoe pin, you can enter that, or if you don't have a pin, just press 1 and the pound key, and you will be entered as a guest. So let's move on to the good stuff. The theme of today's discussion is, funny, that book doesn't look Jewish. The idea for this podcast came from an email exchange I had with author Pam Ehrenberg. She emailed to suggest that I consider including her book Ethan Suspended on the Book of Life. And I wrote back and said that while I'd enjoyed the book very much, I wasn't sure if it was Jewish enough. This began a discussion of what makes a book Jewish anyway, and I decided that the discussion itself would make a good podcast. If you haven't read Ethan Suspended, you are still very welcome to join in our discussion and tell us your own examples of books that may or may not be seen as Jewish in your opinion. In any case, after today, I am sure you will want to read Ethan Suspended. Now let's welcome Pam Ehrenberg to the show. Pam, welcome to the Book of Life.
Hi, Heidi. Thanks so much for having me.
Glad to have you. Pam, can you give us a very brief synopsis of Ethan Suspended?
Sure. Well, it's about a kid who moves to Washington, D.C. to live with his grandparents, where he becomes the only white and the only Jewish student at his school. And he has various adventures here in Washington that ultimately help him come to terms with what was going on back home and the reason for his coming here in the first place.
Pam, can you talk about the title, Ethan Suspended? I have a feeling it means more than Ethan's suspension from school.
Sure. Actually, somebody at the publisher, which is Erdman's Books for Young Readers, they came up with the title, and I was so excited about it because I think it does capture more than just the school suspension, which was the original trigger for all the other events in the book. We don't find out till towards the end exactly why he was suspended. But you're right. Once he comes to D.C., it's very much a story about being suspended between two worlds, not really fitting in here either with the kids at school or in this sort of old people world of his grandparents, but also not really fitting in anywhere else either. I really like the comma that they put in the title because the comma is kind of suspended itself between the two words in there.
That's an interesting idea. What inspired Ethan's story? How did you come to write this book?
Well, the setting was inspired by a D.C. junior high school where I taught 7th and 8th grade English a few years ago. I started to imagine what would happen if a kid arrived there one day who was in many ways very different from the other students there, but turns out to be in some ways not so different. So once I had that idea, I had to sort of figure out, well, who was this kid and what's he doing there and what happens to him afterwards.
Okay. Now, I can see that we've got quite a few callers on the line, so I think what we'll do is we'll take some calls and then we'll come back to talk some more about Ethan Suspended. I do have some more questions for you. But before we open the phones, let me just ask you, why is it significant that Ethan's family is Jewish? Other than making him stand out in his new school so that he learns about being different, couldn't he have been just any kind of white kid? What does Jewishness add to the story?
You know, I didn't consciously sit down and decide I am going to write a Jewish book. I'm not sure what that would have looked like if that had been my thought at the beginning. But after people started to read it, Jewish readers in particular kept telling me, oh, the grandparents are so Jewish. And I think in large part what they were referring to was the way the grandparents talk and the foods that they eat. These are things that identify them, at least among a Jewish readership, as these are identifiably Jewish people. But, if those were the only Jewish things in the book, I think you could still argue either way for whether or not it's, quote, a Jewish book, whatever definition we arrive at today by the end of the show. I think where the Jewish experience comes into the book on a deeper level, what makes this definitively a Jewish book is when we start to find out about Ethan's family's history, particularly during the Civil Rights Movement, and the things that happened to his family and that they experienced that led to where everybody is now. I think those experiences really shaped not just what happened to Ethan's family over the past 40 years, but a lot of relationships between Jewish and African American communities around the country. So while if you were to talk to Ethan himself, he might say that being Jewish isn't always first and foremost on his mind, I think it's very much underlying everything that happens to him and to his family. And it's that level underneath that I think makes it a Jewish book at its heart.
Thanks, Pam. Now we're going to open the phones to a caller from Illinois, and we're going to find out who that is. Hello, Illinois.
Hello.
Hi, who's this?
Hazel Rockman.
Hi, Hazel. Welcome to the Book of Life. Now, I know that you reviewed Ethan Suspended for Booklist.
Right, I reviewed it for Booklist, and I started. And I think what grabbed me is what you were talking about, which was I just knew those grandparents. And, I don't want to get into too much detail, but I think it's very interesting that a lot of people think for a book to be Jewish, it has to have religion or Yiddish, or something like that. And I just love that it's a secular book and yet so Jewish, and that I really love the scene where the grandfather opens the closet up and there's a bit of a menorah and some candles and Shabbat things, and they sort of packed in the cupboard up there, and I think that is a very big part of many people's Jewish experience. And it isn't very often recognized. You very often have people thinking there has to be a focus on being Jewish, conscious of being Jewish and religious. Yiddish too. Well, there is some Yiddish in their idiom, although they don't speak Yiddish. And I think also just that connection with the role of the son in the civil rights movement especially. And as I said in the review, that this is home and that they weren't moving out.
I'm just trying to remember in that scene you're talking about with the cupboard full of candles and everything, isn't that where the grandfather was hiding the double stuffed Oreos behind the candles?
Yes.
Well, thank you, Hazel, for that comment and for the Starred Book Review. Do you want to expand at all on your personal definition of a Jewish book?
I'm really not sure, but it was so good to have a book that was secular and so Jewish, because that's so seldom recognized. And it seemed to me in a tradition of a lot of the old adult writers, where, even Irving Howe in World of Our Fathers would talk about this, that there didn't have to be a religious experience at all. And I think it was just so perfectly captured in that image of the menorah and the candles stuffed away somewhere in the closet.
Well, thank you very much. I'd like to open the phones now to another caller, and this one is also from Illinois. It's marked Northeast Illinois. Who have we got there?
Hi, Heidi. It's me, Brenda Ferber.
Hi, Brenda. I just want to let everybody know that Brenda Ferber is the author of the Sidney Taylor Book Award-winning title Julia's Kitchen. Brenda, what have you got to say?
Well, I have to agree with what Hazel said about Jewish books don't always necessarily have to have so much religion in them. I know I love reading books that just happen to have Jewish characters in it and seeing what that looks like, not necessarily in terms of religion, but just in terms of character. So I don't know. I think that there's a spectrum, and you can have Jewish books about religion, Jewish books about culture, Jewish books about tradition, and Jewish books that just have to do with how that completes the character.
Okay. Having two authors on the line, I just want to take this opportunity to ask you both a question. Both of you have written books that in some ways are identifiably Jewish titles. And I wanted to ask you, how did that evolve? How did they turn into Jewish books? Pam, why don't you go first?
Hi, and thanks so much to both the callers. It's really great hearing everybody's perspectives. I didn't set out to write a Jewish book intentionally. I think it's interesting to think about this idea of Jewish culture and Jewish customs because that term itself can be so broad. By Jewish customs, would we include things like going out for Chinese food on Christmas Day, which many people would say is a Jewish custom for many of us in the U.S. in 2008. But in terms of the traditional Jewish things, no. For Ethan, I think it was just a part of who he was. I like that phrase a lot about it just completes the character. That just kind of seemed to spring up from part of who he was. And I put it in there where that seemed to make sense.
Okay, and Brenda, how about Kara in Julia's Kitchen? Was her Jewishness there from the beginning for you?
It was. I think what was there from the beginning was her relationship with God. And since it's a book about grief, I felt like, well, certainly she's going to have a religion because every book about grief deals with, religious ceremony and ritual. And so I did consciously set out to make her Jewish because I felt like there really weren't any secular books about characters dealing with grief and having those characters be Jewish. So I wanted to make her Jewish to set it apart from all the other books out there that deal with grief. So yes, I did do that from the get-go. But I also never wanted it to be too Jewish. I don't know if that makes sense, but I didn't want to alienate my non-Jewish audience.
Thank you very much, Brenda. Now, I'd like to move on to talk a little bit about Ethan's grandparents. Hazel mentioned them earlier. Ethan's grandparents feel very real to me, although they are also sort of stereotypical in a way. Ethan's grandmother is very fussy, and his grandfather is careful with money to the point of stinginess. Were these characters based on any real people in your life, Pam? How did you develop the characters of the grandparents?
Well, the characters are fully imaginary. I wouldn't say that they're based on any particular people, although I think we've all probably known people who have some of those characteristics. It's hard for me to say for any characters really how I developed them. They seem to come to my mind almost like they already exist fully somewhere, and my job is just to figure out how to get that on paper. Usually that's a job that takes many, many drafts and revisions to really get it right. But in terms of how they actually developed, it's a little hard to pinpoint. The grandfather does have two bits of dialogue that came from real life. His character is fully imaginary, but there were two scenes. One was where he talked to Ethan about person-to-person calling, which was the idea that you used to be able to place a person-to-person call to yourself, and if you weren't there to answer it, then there would be no charge for the call. But if you set that arrangement up with your family in advance, then they would know that you've arrived safely or whatever kind of coded message was hidden in there. That was actually my dad's system for letting his family know that he was safe when he was with the Maryland National Guard. So that was real life. And the other thing was when his grandfather talks about how it's important to cut out coupons or else you're subsidizing the people who do cut them out. My dad explained that to me when I was about Ethan's age, although I should point out that my dad does not have special coupon cutting scissors. He usually just tears them out, and he doesn't mind being interrupted while he's doing it.
So he's not quite as obsessed about coupons as Ethan's grandfather.
Not nearly. Just the language about subsidizing the people who, why should we pay for them to cut out coupons? That was the only piece from real life.
Okay, well, let's go to a call from Marie. Hi, Marie.
Hi, I'm Marie. I'm from Cambridge, Massachusetts, and I thought this was really an interesting topic. In the library that I work at, the collection was formed by a woman who has a long career as a children's librarian outside of the synagogue world, and really brings in a wide diversity or collection of things. Not all of our books are strictly speaking Jewish. They don't all have Jewish characters or even mention Judaism, although the vast majority of them do, obviously. So I've kind of learned, to think of Jewish books as books that support our Hebrew school curriculum in some way. For example, we use a book called The Teddy Bear by David McPhail. That book is about a little boy who loses his teddy bear and finds it again later with a homeless man and decides to let the homeless man keep the bear. And we use that book to teach our unit on mitzvahs and doing good deeds because it's a really sweet story about kindness and being nice to people. So I think that, in that way, it doesn't have to even necessarily have explicitly Jewish content to be considered a Jewish book.
I would totally agree with that. In fact, one of my favorite secular books to use in a Jewish context is Know David by David Shannon. I think it is the perfect book to use with young children for Yom Kippur because it really keys into the theme of forgiveness and taking responsibility for the bad things you've done. As I'm sure the listeners are familiar, David is a very disobedient kid, and all day long his mom tells him, "No, David," about everything that he does, and in the end he tells her he's sorry and she forgives him. So I think that sometimes secular books can do a really great job of providing a Jewish message if we just do a good job of recognizing and identifying those books.
Exactly.
All right. Is there anything else you wanted to add to that?
No, that's about it. I haven't read Ethan Suspended, but I think I'll probably be wanting to take a look at it soon. It sounds like a good book.
It definitely is. Thank you for calling.
My pleasure.
I just want to mention that Marie is a blogger. Her blog is called The Boston Bibliophile. Pam, I want to go back to Ethan Suspended. In the story, Ethan learns to play oboe in the jazz band of all things, and he gets involved with the charity Hungry for Music. This is a real-life charity. Can you tell us about your own connection to Hungry for Music?
Sure. I actually found it on the internet, as so many things. I imagine that I had heard of it vaguely somewhere before because when I got to the part of the story where Ethan and his friends are trying to identify a cause where they can use their music to do some good in the world, it somehow sprung to mind that I thought I had heard about a real-life group that does this sort of thing. So I started searching around, and I found it. And they've been just wonderful since the book has come out. We've been in touch a few times, and it really is a terrific organization that helps provide musical opportunities to kids who wouldn't otherwise have those opportunities. I actually had used to play an instrument. I played the cello back in 5th through 8th grade, so just up to the time that I was Ethan's age. And one of my biggest regrets in life is that when I got to high school, the school orchestra class was scheduled at the same time as a section of honors biology that some guidance counselor had decided I should be in, and therefore that was it for music. It was really only recently that it occurred to me that someone could have presented me with a choice of do I take this higher level science or do I take the music class, but it was just kind of assumed that the science was going to win out, which may be an issue in our schools today with topic for a different call-in show. But I was glad to be able to have the chance to put in some good about school music programs.
Hungry for Music, I also wanted to mention, in addition to the great work they do directly with kids, they sell CDs. And I had purchased a CD of baseball-themed music a while ago to get the Yiddish version of Take Me Out to the Ball Game that I needed for the baseball-themed episode we had on the Book of Life back in May. So I just wanted to mention that. You can find them at hungryformusic.org, I believe. Now I want to invite a caller into the conversation. She's got a username of J. Gingold.
That's me. Hi, I'm Janet Gingold. I'm in Upper Marlboro, Maryland. I love Ethan Suspended because I think it's such a great book for teaching tolerance. And I think that because you have a whole bunch of different kinds of people in there, old people, young people, black people, Hispanic people, and Jewish people, all kind of bumping up against each other, doing ordinary everyday things, all finding out new things about each other, the reader really gets a very good experience as they go through Ethan's experience in getting to know some people who are totally different from themselves. And I think that Ethan Suspended is such a great book about understanding and reaching across ethnic divides. I really have a problem with calling it a Jewish book because I think it should be a everybody book. I don't want labeling it a Jewish book to inhibit other people from picking it up. And I mean, I have to tell you that I have a pet peeve about ghettoizing the library. I live in Prince George's County, which is a suburban county in Maryland where the majority of people are black, and I am in a small minority. My kids went to public school and in many ways had experiences a lot like Ethan's because in many situations they were the only white kid in a large group of black kids. And anyway, that's one of the reasons why I really enjoyed this book. But when I go to my public library, all of the books for so-called black interest books or African American interest books. They are all separated out from the rest of the collection. So it's like, okay, here's the shelf with all the black books on it. And to me, that is just so against the whole concept of what a library should be about. I mean, the books should be integrated. You should be, browsing the shelves and seeing all these different books by all these different kinds of people, including different kinds of characters. And then you kind of stumble onto things that you think are interesting, and you pick them up and you read them, and you learn about somebody who's different from you, instead of sort of making sure everybody only reads about the people who are like themselves, So anyway, I mean, that's where I'm coming from when I say, yes, it might be a Jewish book because it has wonderful Jewish characters. And, yeah, those grandparents remind me of my husband's parents, and there's all this other kind of stuff. Or, and, this whole thing about, being a sort of the stranger in a strange land kind of imagery where, maybe you're the only one of your kind in this group. I mean, there's a lot of sort of Jewishness about that aspect of human experience. But this book is such a good vehicle for helping kids understand that other kids might see themselves differently than you see them, and also just seeing that Ethan, even though he is like separate from these other people, his perception of these other people is sympathetic, and he's trying to figure them out. It's important for non-Jewish kids to see that this Jewish kid doesn't think less of them, but is trying to figure them out in a very human and sympathetic way. I think that mindset is something that should be shared with all kinds of kids, not just Jewish kids.
Thank you, Janet. That is such an interesting point. I think that one way that we're seeing this differently is, for instance, I work in a synagogue library. So to me, if I can define the book as Jewish, that allows me to be more inclusive. It allows me to bring it into my collection. If I see it as a secular book, then it doesn't belong in my collection. So defining a book as Jewish for me is more inclusive, whereas in a public library or a school library setting, you're right, it could be more divisive. So I guess it depends on the setting in which you find the book. It's so interesting. Thank you very much. Okay, now I'd like to bring in a caller from California. This is Barbara Bates, who, by the way, is the author of Like a Maccabee and also blogs about Jewish children's literature at barbarabbookblog.blogspot.com. Welcome, Barbara.
Oh, this is such a great discussion, and I think everybody's had such valuable information to share. First, I have to say I loved Ethan Suspended from beginning to end, and it was one of those books where I was sitting and reading the end, and my husband was sitting next to me, and I just started sobbing. And it was one of those times where he turned to me and said, "What is wrong with you?" And I said, "It's the book. It's the book." I was so deeply touched by it. And to me, I think it's really interesting what the previous caller had said about not separating books in terms of, what cultural elements we see in them. But at the same time, I think it's nice for kids to read a book and identify with a character and say, that's what it's like at my house. That's how it feels to me. And I think that's what is the nice part about sort of labeling books as Jewish literature, that a kid can pick it up and even if it's not a religious book, can look at it and have some sense of identification, whether it's cultural or just a basic value, and to feel like they are kind of part of that bigger picture in the story that they're reading.
So this is interesting. Now we've gotten both sides, that labeling a book as Jewish can either draw readers toward the book or make them feel like they should not read the book. I guess it really depends on your point of view.
Well, and I think what's important, though, is that typically when we think Jewish literature, we do think it's religious, and that does kind of separate it as, we can only read this maybe for a religious school project or a Jewish school. But I think some of the newer things that have come out are maybe a little more secular and do have a broader appeal. So in that sense, it's important to be able to identify those books.
As you were saying before, it's great to feel a connection to the character. And of course, from a Jewish point of view, then you want to know that the books are Jewish. This leads me into another question that I have for Pam, actually. Do you feel that Jewish or white readers will respond differently to Ethan Suspended than black readers, or as they call them in the book, Spanish readers? What responses have you gotten so far?
I'd actually love to get more responses from readers on this. I think what would be most interesting for me actually would be to have a diverse group of kids all read the book together as some sort of book club or library project or something either in person or online. So if there are any teachers or librarians out there who could somehow make that happen, I would love to talk with anybody about that. As far as the responses so far, I've heard from a number of Jewish readers who say that they can relate to the experiences and the characters, which was a great feeling for me. So thank you for people who have said that. And I have heard from several people who, like Janet's kids, have said that they had experiences similar to that, to what Ethan went through of being one of just a few white or Jewish students in a mostly African-American community. I haven't yet heard from African-American or Latino young adults who have read the book, although the young adult librarian at the main branch of the DC library system says, that may be on its way. I don't know yet if I'm just not marketing it the right way or if it is something about the labeling. There is a Jewish-looking kid on the cover of the book, so I don't know if that is sending out some message to people. Or maybe we need a call-in show about, funny, that book doesn't look African-American. That can be part 2.
Okay, yeah, that would really be interesting. So if anybody listening out there has a way to facilitate getting responses from different kinds of readers, we'd love to hear more about that at bookoflifepodcast.com. You can get in touch. Let's try a caller now from New Jersey.
Hello, this is Kathy Pinchuk. Hi.
Hi, Kathy. Kathy is the incoming chair of the Sidney Taylor Book Award for the Association of Jewish Libraries. Kathy, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I got to sit with Pam at the 92nd Street Y Jewish Children's Writers Conference. The conference was great, and it was a pleasure to sit with Pam, and it was a pleasure to read the book. I really enjoyed it, and I think it really emphasizes the evolution of Jewish people in America, that it's not about the Lower East Side. It's not people, eating bagels. It's not people, as you say, going out to dinner for Chinese on Christmas. It's really just a normal person in a normal story dealing with normal things.
Okay. And do you feel like that makes it more of a Jewish book, less of a Jewish book? What do you think?
I think I didn't find it overtly Jewish, but I found a Jewish sensitivity in the book. I found I could definitely relate to the grandparents. I found I could relate to Ethan as being sensitive to other ethnicities and having other interests and having compassion and trying to, being a little introspective for a boy that age and figuring out what was going on in his life. And I just wanted to tell you, my son is in yeshiva day school in a very Jewish environment, and I mentioned to Pam when I met her that I really want him to read this book to see that, Jewish people can go out in the world and deal with everybody else and get along with everybody else.
So you feel, I think somebody mentioned this earlier, you feel that the book itself will help to breed tolerance.
I think it will breed tolerance, and as a Jewish librarian, people often ask me in my school, fellow parents, fellow librarians, what's a good book for boys 5th, 6th grade that's not too violent, not too anything, and this is definitely one of those books that I would highly recommend to that age group.
Thank you, Kathy. Now I'd like to bring in a caller from Cleveland. Hello, Cleveland. Who's there?
Hello, it's Linda Silver from snowy Cleveland. I've been listening for a while with great interest, and I guess first I'm going to say that I, with all the rest of the people I heard, thought that Ethan Suspended was a wonderful book. But then I'm going to go on and say I don't think it is a Jewish book in any sense of the word. And I'll tell you why. It represents a growing trend in books from secular publishers, especially those for teens, in that it merely mentions or suggests that a character is Jewish and nothing more. For instance, in a book that I think was a HAL notable book last year, Notes from a Midnight Driver, the only hint that one of the characters is Jewish is that he spouts Yiddish. And the possibility that he's Yiddish is irrelevant to the book's plot or meaning. Any ethnic group with a distinctive speech pattern would do. There are no expressly Jewish values in the book, and I think the same thing is true of Ethan Suspended. As I said, I think it's a well-written book and a book that's wholesome and will be great for kids to read, but it doesn't seem to me it falls into the category of Jewish books. And as a reviewer and a book review editor and a writer, it's important to me, because of what I do, to distinguish between what is a Jewish book and what isn't. One of the callers said that she thought it was really unfortunate when public libraries segregated their ethnic books. I do too. I don't think that has any place in a public library. But for those of us who work with Jewish children's literature and promote Jewish children's literature, I think it is important to distinguish between what is a Jewish book and what isn't. And as I said, for all its value, I don't think that Ethan Suspended is a Jewish book. If you could replace the characters, those characters could be Italian or they could be Irish. And that's my test. Could the character be another ethnic group with no other change to the book? And I think that's true of Ethan Suspended. They could have been Irish, they could have been Italian. I hope that causes some controversy.
You hope it does cause some controversy.
Oh, I'm sure it will. But
Okay, well, thank you for calling, Linda. And let me go ahead and see, Pam, if that causes controversy for you. Do you agree with Linda's definition of Ethan Suspended? Do you think that Ethan's family could have been some other ethnicity besides Jewish?
Well, I love controversy, I have to say. So maybe I don't know if that's a Jewish trait or not, if that's just me. But personally, I think that Ethan's family could not have been another ethnicity, because I think I wouldn't have gotten to know him in quite the same way. So from my knowledge of Ethan, he is a Jewish character. In terms of whether that makes the book necessarily a Jewish book, I think it is a Jewish book at heart, but with the caveat that I think some readers could easily read the book and miss any Jewish reference and miss the fact that they were Jewish, particularly somebody reading it in a not traditionally Jewish community who hasn't had a lot of experience with Jewish people. And while their experience of the book would be different for that, I don't know that they couldn't also come away with an experience of the book that was also valid. So I don't know if that lessens the credibility as a Jewish book, or if you could say that for some readers it could be, while others it may not. I feel like that relationship between the book and the reader is really important, that some of it comes from what people are bringing in would affect what they're taking out of it. I don't know if that's answering a question with another question, maybe another Jewish trait, I don't know. But I'd love to hear from other people on this, because as you can see, I'm still very much sorting it out myself.
That's an interesting point, that a book is different things to different readers, and that maybe a reader with a Jewish background who recognizes the Jewish elements of the book, that makes it a Jewish book for them, and that might not happen for somebody else. Let's bring in now a caller from California. Hello, California, are you there?
It's Rita, and I'm not in California right now. I'm in Seattle.
Oh, I wonder why it says California. Oh, it must be your phone number. The system registers your area code.
Yeah, you know, you're right. It is my phone number. I'm on my cell phone.
Yeah, it's your Californian phone number. Well, so you're in Seattle. Welcome from Seattle.
I'm in an alien environment. I'm a Jew in an alien environment. But I still have my identity intact. This is a wonderful discussion. I'm very interested. I've enjoyed the book very much. If Linda Silver is on, I reviewed Notes from Midnight Driver for Jewish Book World, and it seems to me that I can't remember who called in who talked about using books that weren't overtly Jewish for Jewish purposes or Jewish values and expanding. It may have been you, for that matter, that said that, Heidi. But I think in some instances, this kind of book for an older reader serves that purpose. It's a crossover. It's sort of like American Jews. It's a fluid definition. And in Ethan Suspended, which I enjoyed very much, I agree with Pam that I don't see Ethan Suspended as being the same book if we had an Italian or an Irish person, but that's because I'm coming from a Jewish viewpoint. I see a question of values and messages, and I think it's what you read a lot of material that isn't overtly Jewish for. And if I were reviewing for a very traditional environment, I may review it with certain caveats or certain comments, and for a different kind of environment with other comments. I definitely think it's a general secular book of great use in a public library and for a wide readership. So I don't like the idea of labeling, but in terms of acquisition for a Jewish library, which I ran for so many years, it is a book I would add, and it has those Jewish values. Now, you know, I did a presentation with Hazel Karp at an International Librarians Conference on using secular or crossover books to teach Jewish values. And this is the kind of book that we talked about, that it was a valid book used in a Jewish context, but it also went above and beyond that.
Rita Frischer, thank you so much for calling. Now, I wanted to ask Pam another question before we go back to the phones. Pam, what led you to become a writer?
I think I've always been a writer on some level, and I hear that from other writers as well, so maybe it's somewhat a common experience. The earliest experience I remember with writing fiction was when I was in kindergarten. We had this paper they gave us where you could draw a picture across the top, and then you would dictate the story to the teacher, and she'd write it down on these wide lines at the bottom of it. And I remember standing up in front of my kindergarten class with one of these stories I had created where it was something having to do with a witch and a house. The house was filled with people, and it was very dramatic. And when I stopped the story, at the end, a boy shouted out, "Because the witch ate everybody." And that was his clear reaction of, obviously that's what must have happened next, and he was very excited about it. And that wasn't at all what I had intended. I have no idea what I thought was supposed to happen, but that was clearly his interpretation, and I think that may have been what led me to start thinking about, on whatever level, but that interaction between the writer and the reader, that the whole process for me has been about figuring out how to transmit what's in my head to other readers. And so my writing group and writing friends are an incredibly valuable resource for that, in exchanging manuscript drafts and all that sort of thing.
Very interesting. Thanks, Pam. Let's bring in another caller from California.
This is Maggie. I've been listening to this fascinating discussion, and especially since my books are so obviously Jewish, that it's interesting to think about what actually makes another book Jewish, whether it's a Jewish author, Jewish subject, Jewish characters.
Let me just interrupt and ask you to tell about your books for readers who are not familiar with them.
Oh, of course. I'm Maggie Anton. I'm the author of Rashi's Daughters, a trilogy of historical novels that takes place in the 11th century in the household of the great Talmudic scholar who had no sons and only daughters. And legend has it that these women were learned and that they studied Talmud at a time that certainly women were forbidden to do this. And because the trilogy is adult-oriented, Jewish Publication Society actually came to me to create a YA version. They thought that young people, I guess 10 to 13, YA means young adult, but they're not really young adults, they're teenagers. Yeah. And so I did adapt the first book into a YA version. So now I'm interested in Jewish children's book and talk about children's books. And I'm actually more interested in how do you divide a children's book? I mean, since Ethan Suspended is clearly YA, where's the borderline between adult and teenager and children's? I just read Book Thief, and that to me was quite clearly an adult book.
Well, now that's a whole nother interesting conversation. The Book Thief was originally published as an adult book in Australia, but when it was published in the U.S., it was YA, I guess because he was already established as a YA author here. But it's an interesting question about age range, and I guess there are borderline cases at either end, older and younger. Pam, do you have any opinions on age range?
I agree that it seems like it's such an arbitrary distinction at times. When Erdman's came out with the book on the dust jacket, it says recommended for ages, I think it says 11 and up, but when I start hearing from readers, I feel like anything above 14 they're going to read it, adults have read it, but they're going to read it as if, okay, this is something intended for somewhat younger readers. And at the same time, I'm hearing from 9 and 10-year-old readers who want to kind of read up and want to feel like they're like the cool 12-year-olds or whatever. So I agree that it really is a hard science for me. I'm not really sure how they arrive at those distinctions.
Do you think it's because the character is that age? because I guess the heroine starts when she's 10 years old. Is that what makes a book children or YA? Is that the protagonist is that age?
I think that's frequently the case. I mean, if you think back to the quote-unquote olden days, there were books about child protagonists that were actually adult books, like think of Great Expectations, starts when Pip is a little boy. But I think that it is probably a common way to decide that the book should be geared towards the age of the protagonist, unless, of course, it's a story where there's something traumatic happening in the childhood and the storyline or the events are more emotionally sophisticated or mature, then maybe it's actually an adult book with a child protagonist. Now I'd like to open up the phone lines to everybody who is waiting to speak. I'm going to unmute all of us so that we can all chime in. And what I'd like to do now is ask about your own definition of a Jewish book. So let's hear what our callers have to say.
I have a thought on that topic. This is Janet.
Hi.
I would like Pam to tell us how she sees the Jewish values that are portrayed in this book. I know that you said earlier that to you it was very much connected to the experience of this family with the civil rights movement and the fact that when everybody else left that neighborhood, they were the white family that stayed. Anyway, could you throw in some things there about how that experience fits in with Jewish values?
What a great question. I think it does fit in with some of the Jewish values that have been talked about from the various callers about tolerance and about crossing over boundaries. It probably also relates to the Jewish experience or the Jewish values that have come out of experiences of being in the minority and therefore feeling empathy and reaching out to other minority groups. Not to say that these values don't also turn up in plenty of other cultures as well, but the Jewish lens may have helped to shape my thinking on some of those kinds of values. I don't know if that gets it.
Yeah, that kind of gets it. Because I think the values in Ethan Suspended are some of these values of the way I see Jewish people who I know living their lives, good law-abiding citizens, blah, blah, blah. Okay, that may not be particularly observant in terms of, holidays and Sabbaths and dietary things. The fundamental values about other things about how you live your life in terms of how you relate to other people and how you treat other people as human beings, how you do good things for other people, how Ethan knows that the right thing to do is to warn Diego that he might get hurt. All of those things, I mean, they're not just Jewish values, but they're very human values that are part of what underlies the story in a way that it makes it very full of values. So anyway, that's what I wanted to say. Next.
Thank you.
I want to let you know that I just got an email from Mary Claire Mahaney, the author of Osaka Heat, and she says, I met Pam last summer when we shared a table at a book signing at Barnes & Noble. I enjoyed Ethan Suspended so much that I couldn't put it down. Pam's a terrific writer. I have a question for Pam. What are you working on now, Pam, and will your next books involve Jewish protagonists?
Well, thanks, Mary Claire. I have to say, I really enjoyed getting to know Mary Claire as well. And we went to the zoo recently where she was working on illustrating some gorillas for her next upcoming children's book as well. The next book, I have a book under contract with Erdmann's, probably coming out later this year or early in 2009. Right now it's called Tillman County Fire, although based on my experience with changing the title of Ethan Suspended, I can't guarantee that's still going to be the title on the cover next year. But that book, I think, will take this conversation perhaps one step further. That one is a novel told as a series of short stories where each piece is from a different character who was involved in an event. It takes place in rural West Virginia, and it involves some kids who set fire to one of their classmates' homes. And each perspective is a little bit different. One of the characters, who is central to the story, has a Jewish father who has left the state of West Virginia, and that factors very heavily into that particular character's experiences. But there are, as you can imagine, not so many Jewish people in this community. None of the other characters is Jewish. And I think it was a similar kind of experience in writing it. I wasn't consciously writing a Jewish book. I think looking at that character's story, that one section of the novel, would clearly have some Jewish content and Jewish resonance in terms of whether that then makes this a Jewish book? I'm not sure. Maybe next year we can have part 2 of our conversation, and you guys can help me figure it out. But that's kind of where we are with that.
This is Maggie. I think the characters or the content needs to be identifiably Jewish, not just that the author is Jewish. I mean, if Philip Roth writes a murder mystery that has nothing to do with Judaism, I don't think that qualifies as a Jewish book just because he's a well-known Jewish author. And I think it's entirely possible for a non-Jewish author to write a Jewish book if there are Jewish characters in there that are identifiably so, and not just the neighbor down the street who accidentally walks into a scene.
I would agree with Maggie on that. Back in the day, one of the big Jewish books was Gentleman's Agreement by Laura Hobson, which was considered a Jewish book. But it was a Jewish book only to the extent that it looked at the Jewish situation from a different viewpoint. Yet in that day, it was considered a very Jewish book because it was the first time anybody opened the insider's eyes to what it was like to be the Jewish outsider.
The Jewish book, then, one that appeals to a Jewish audience, and it doesn't matter who writes it?
Oh, what you had said was that you could have a Jewish book that was written by a non-Jew. And I think that that's true. It doesn't happen very often because the most authentic books seem to grow from a tremendous familiarity and a connection, the emotional resonance, as it were. But it could happen.
I definitely want to point out that happens because with the Sidney Taylor Book Award, we've had a number of winners, of gold medalists that were written by non-Jewish authors. The majority are by Jewish authors, but for instance, Stones in Water by Donna Jo Napoli, The Book Thief by Marcus Zusak, he's not Jewish.
Lois Lowry, for heaven's sake.
Lois Lowry, right, Number the Stars, probably one of the most famous Jewish books. All the kids have seen it in their public schools because it won the Newbery.
Any book that addresses the Holocaust, even if all the characters are Christian, I mean, The Book Thief, the Jewish character in there is really minor, and I think the book would have worked just as well even if the Jewish character was not in there. But because it addresses the Nazi time, this book then becomes of interest to Jews, even if there's not really Jews in it and the author's not Jewish.
Now, when I built my collection, I did not necessarily define every Holocaust book as one that I would add. And the other thing that was raised when someone talked about the Black collection in the public library, I never could see defining the Holocaust section of the library. The poetry that was, Holocaust poetry was in with poetry, thank you very much. And the topic was not the definition. If you were sorting by genre or by form, let them stumble across what they wanted. And that's what a catalog is for anyway, tie some of those things together.
We've got a new caller joining us from Cleveland. Who's there from Cleveland?
This is Andy calling from the Temple Tifereth Israel. Unfortunately, I missed part of it, but I was listening to people talking about what makes a book Jewish, and I just feel that it's not always a Jewish author, but more importantly, Jewish characters, or if they're really dealing with something that is of concern to people who are Jewish. And I thought that Ethan Suspended was a very good book. I've been enjoying recommending it to the boys in 5th and 6th grade at our temple.
Thanks, Andy. Now, we're almost out of time, but I just wanted to get this in before we do run out of time. June Cummins, who is an associate professor of English and Comparative Literature at San Diego State University, had emailed in a question ahead of time for me to read. And she says, in my Jewish American Lit class, I explained to the students the criteria I use in selecting books for the syllabus. I have to contend with both the Jewish and American identity issues. For Jewish, I tell the students that I choose authors who are Jews. I tell them this after we have an exercise in which I show them how various and numerous definitions of Judaism are, so they know that the criterion of being Jewish is flexible and accommodating. But I don't know that I would use the same criteria for the question of what makes a book Jewish. I do think that Jewish content makes the book Jewish even if the author is not Jewish. I use a wider definition for what constitutes a Jewish text than I do for what is needed for an author to get on my syllabus. Still, if the book had Jewish content but the author was not Jewish, I would look for signs that the author was familiar with Jewish culture. We had been talking about issues of authorship, so I just wanted to get June's comment in. Well, I can't believe it, but we are out of time, so I want to thank Pam Ehrenberg for being our special guest.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
And I want to thank everyone who has called in today and been part of our wonderful conversation. And I do want to remind everyone that this is being recorded and will be part of the regular podcast feed very soon. And you can check bookoflifepodcast.com to listen to this and other interesting conversations about Jewish books, music, film, and web. So once again, thanks everybody, and as always, happy reading. Please do let me know what you thought of the call-in format. Email bookoflifepodcast@gmail.com, post a comment on our website, or if your computer has a microphone, leave a 2-minute voice message by clicking on the voicemail link on our website. The Book of Life is supported in part by the Association of Jewish Libraries, tending the tree of knowledge and promoting Jewish reading by supporting Judaic libraries and librarians. Visit them on the web at jewishlibraries.org. Our background music is provided by the Freilach Makers Klezmer String Band from Sacramento, California, whose CDs feature upbeat music from Ashkenazic and Sephardic traditions with Brazilian, Gypsy, and Celtic influences. Borrow their CDs at the Feldman Library or buy your own copies at freilachmakers.com. To download episodes of the Book of Life podcast, visit us on the web at bookoflifepodcast.com. Links to the books and CDs mentioned on the show are available on this website. You can also hear the latest episode by phone. Just call 916-313-3820. Again, thanks for listening and happy reading.